after 2 o'clock, we'll just get started because we've got quite a full agenda to get through. So I would like to formally welcome everyone to this meeting of the North East Scotland Freight Forum. It is an organisation that in theory has been established for a number of years, but hasn't met on an awfully regular occurrence. I think the last one was certainly over a year ago, but nevertheless, welcome to everybody here. And if there's an appetite for more of these things, we'd be more than happy, more than delighted to involve people going forward from here. So I think with no further ado, we will, I think, just introduce speakers as we go along, and there'll be an opportunity for Q&A at the end. I think initially we had aimed for about a 3:30 finish, but we'll try and be a bit flexible about that. If people wish to keep going, there might be an opportunity to run on a little bit, but don't feel under pressure if you feel you've other things that you need to get on and get done. So first on our list is Nicky Laird, who's going to talk to us about the Civitas Portus project that we've been involved in over the last, I think, 4 years, Nicky, but I won't steal your thunder and hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll try and make this relatively quick because I know we've got a lot to get through. Also, just before I start, I would just like to say there has been a slight change to the agenda. If we can please take hydrogen and freight as item 4, and then follow on with national matters and ongoing projects after that. It's just because Louise does need to get away a little bit earlier. So to make sure they have a chance.
I've got that on my notes, and I'll try and encourage speakers to stick to 10 minutes tops so that we get an opportunity for Q&A at the end. So that was a warning to you and to the other speakers before we kick off.
Well, I'll try my hardest then. I do have 2 entire projects to get through, but yes, my name's Nicola Laird. I'm Transport Officer at Nestrans, and I'm just going to do a quick run through of freight and freight routing in the northeast of Scotland, which is the 2 main projects that we did with the Civitas Portus project. So first of all, just a quick little introduction in case you don't know of who Nestrans is. We are one of 7 regional transport partnerships across Scotland, which is a statutory strategic transport body for Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. Our annual budget is over £4 million. And we were full partners in the Civitas Portus project, which was a large-scale European project looking at sustainable transport in harbour cities. Nestrans was the work package lead for the projects 4ABZ1 freight routing and 4ABZ3 freight distribution. You would have possibly seen them referred to on the links that I sent out with the agenda. So looking at 4ABZ1, freight routing and reducing impact, this was the first main project that we were taking a look at. And at the start of this project, freight flows in and around the Aberdeen City region were analysed in respect of several key areas. The impact of the new port area, the impact of the construction of the Aberdeen Western Peripheral Route, otherwise known as the AWPR, the availability of clean fuel refuelling stations, the region's economic base, and the current routes being taken by freight operators, their views on the AWPR, clean fuelling and routing in the northeast of Scotland. That was done through a stakeholder engagement and surveys. Following this initial analysis, a baseline report for the project was produced and published on the website along with the results of the surveys. Following from that, a number of objectives were set up to implement organisational and infrastructural mobility measures for urban freight logistics, to work collaboratively in developing proposals to access the new port and provide solutions which improve the efficient and effective movement of goods whilst minimising the impact on residential areas, the environment and other road users, including walkers and cyclists. To update the mapping of preferred HGVs and freight routes, which has last been done some years previously, and to undertake a review into effective freight traffic management in light of post-AWPR and road hierarchy, and also taking into consideration any further alterations that would be required in relation to the new harbour development. So turning to the freight routing strategy, which formed the main part of this project. This strategy was developed based on the signing strategy for the AWPR, the roads hierarchy, which was redeveloped following the opening of the AWPR, and the Aberdeen Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, otherwise known as the SUMP. Consultation on the roads hierarchy and the SUMP was taken in collaboration with industry stakeholders, who also fed into the new freight routing strategy as well through a stakeholder focus group. They highlighted any areas of the strategy that may have been overlooked or could pose problematic for the efficient movement of freight. Representation was also made on any areas of the roads hierarchy that conflicted with the movement of freight, including any recommendations for priority routes that would create a barrier to freight movement due to height or width restrictions. As you can see from a couple of images on this slide, the routing strategy was developed as a map of the region, which highlights the recommended routes in the form of a hierarchy for freight. This includes recommendations for routes that act as a through road for freight, as well as access routes for industrial and retail sites. All major restrictions that could impact on the majority of freight vehicles were identified and put onto this map, as well as primary destinations for freight vehicles in the northeast of Scotland. It is intended that the routing strategy will be rolled out in both a published and online format that's a bit more publicly accessible. Work is ongoing to look at potential applications of new maps and the new map in an app format as well. Currently, this map is available online through the Nestrans website, and I did provide a link before this meeting. This is a working document. It does provide a lot more information than we would necessarily make publicly available. But we're looking to update it and make sure it's as comprehensive as possible moving forward. So we do invite any suggestions for additions to the map, including any restrictions or destinations that we may have missed. So what were the findings from this project? What we found when we reviewed the project following the development of the routing strategy was that freight on main roads through Aberdeen has reduced, whilst freight on priority routes, including the new bypass, has increased. New traffic counters have improved data collection and understanding of freight on less appropriate routes. Acceptance of the AWPR has increased, and the AWPR now has the highest proportion of freight as a percentage of all traffic. Next slide mainly shows those outcomes in a numerical format, and showed a couple of key expectations that came out both in terms of analysing the data and also the second stakeholder engagement surveys that we did at the end of the project. These expectations are that in the short to medium term, they will continue to be a natural move of freight from the city centre routes and rural roads to the AWPR. As operators realise the benefits in journey times. But the second expectation is that without further interventions and measures to minimise unnecessary through freight traffic within the city centre and on inappropriate routes for freight, freight traffic may be at a risk of increase on these routes in the longer term due to an equilibrium developing between the AWPR and other less appropriate routes. This is a particular concern for freight traffic, as although there are currently journey time benefits to using the AWPR, we are aware that many of those journeys using that road require more mileage and could increase fuel costs. If this leads to other routes becoming quieter and therefore quicker, we could see that drivers elect to use the less expensive option unless there's other measures in place to dissuade them. But of course, we're also still considering the efficient and the effective movement of freight. So that leads on to the second project that we were working on, which was low carbon deliveries and distribution solutions, which looked very much at movement through the city centre as well as last mile movements as well. So the primary focus of this measure was research into distribution and last mile interventions, including the benefits and risks of consolidation, along with the mapping of current and future areas to the south of the city that could be used for any potential consolidation centre. Awareness and acceptance of a potential consolidation centre was also analysed. Originally in this project, outcomes were due to lead to provisional planning guidance on the development of a consolidation centre, with an objective of encouraging logistics and distribution activities in particular areas of the city. However, following research into existing and previous consolidation centres in the UK and Europe, as well as research into other consolidation practices and alternatives for last mile distribution, it was decided it wasn't appropriate to continue to progress towards producing provisional planning guidance for a consolidation centre in the Aberdeen area. Instead, focus was changed to develop an updated freight distribution strategy that included an action plan for developing alternative last mile solutions following the conclusion of the Portus project. And that was also very much backed up by the results of both of the stakeholder engagement surveys that we did. As part of this project as well, promotion and piloting of alternatively fuelled vehicles was also undertaken, in particular a hydrogen project with 2 companies, which followed the identification of the most suitable technologies and users. So the key findings from 4ABZ3 was that whilst diesel remains the most used fuel type for freight vehicles, over the course of the project there has been an improvement in the Euro class of vehicles, particularly amongst HGVs. There was also improvement seen amongst respondents who completed both surveys, suggesting that there has been a renewal of vehicles through those respondents, with the oldest and least efficient vehicles being replaced. Part of this is likely due to the natural renewal of fleets, although we are aware that the planned low emission zone may also have influenced decision making in this respect. The second result was that both the survey and discussions with operators throughout the project showed a reticence to consider alternative fuels for freight vehicles. Attitudes expressed from discussions with operators of HGVs was that technology is not yet at a place where electric or hydrogen fuelled HGVs would be a viable option. Although operators are looking to renew fleets to comply with emission requirements in potential low emission zones, the average lifespan of such vehicles being over 7 years means that further incentives will be required to encourage operators to utilise alternative fuels now, if the target is to only allow zero emission vehicles in the future. Through this project, there has been several successes with regards to LEV uptake, however, with Aberdeen Harbour Board, Siemens and Royal Mail all agreeing to trial LEVs, with Aberdeen Harbour Board using electric and Siemens and Royal Mail both using hybrid hydrogen vehicles. And the third result was, during the course of the project, it became clear that there was no appetite for a dedicated consolidation centre in Aberdeen, and that implementing one would have been unlikely to be commercially viable at this moment in time. Again, sorry, nearly done. Again, at the next slide shows the outcomes in a numerical format. We can see in particular the changes in Euro 6 HGVs and Euro 6 LGVs, but also the low acceptance towards a consolidation centre. So looking to the future, what's the legacy? We expect that freight maps will still be published in are still to be published in a publicly friendly format, and we'll look at alternative ways to make them available digitally. The hydrogen pilots are still ongoing, with Royal Mail and Siemens each currently trialling a hybrid vehicle. Whilst COVID has impacted on the follow-on work with regards to the distribution strategy and action plan, it is anticipated that progress will resume once the situation in Aberdeen is more settled. And at the start of 2020, Nestrans and Aberdeen City Council were successful in getting additional funding from Transport Scotland to complement the planned LEZ, which allowed Nestrans to progress part of the distribution strategy action plan through the launch of an electric cargo bike trial for city centre businesses. 4 cargo trikes and 2 cargo bikes were procured in March of last year, with 5 out of the 6 bikes currently in use by local businesses. And initial monitoring results are positive, showing a CO2 saving of around 3 to 4 kilograms per month per bike, and a fuel saving of around £6 to £7 per bike compared to the equivalent journeys by a small van. So looking at the final conclusions, we can conclude from these 2 projects that the AWPR has proven successful in enabling freight vehicles to avoid Aberdeen as well as rural routes, and this will provide a solid foundation for further traffic management measures to minimise freight vehicles travelling on inappropriate routes or through the city centre unnecessarily. The second conclusion is that whilst there have been major upgrades to the available data on traffic movements, this requires further improvement, particularly on busy rural routes, as the majority of the current data is focused on trunk roads in Aberdeen. And the third conclusion is that whilst gains have been made, and including other sectors within the Freight Forum, and thank you very much to everyone who's attended today, given the disparity of the sector, there is still variable engagement with the industry overall. As in addition to the larger Freight Forum, the stakeholder working group that was set up as part of the Civitas project, and I know that some of you are here today, has proven very valuable, both to Portus as well as other projects. So it's anticipated that this group will be maintained and strengthened to advise and engage on other projects moving forward. And that's it from me. All those documents that I referred to are available through our website. I think I did link to them all with the agenda. Happy to take any questions at the end, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Nikki. As you say, I think we'll try and keep questions to the end, although I would encourage people, if they have any thoughts immediately on as the speakers are going through, then we would encourage you to put them into the conversation, the chat line on the side of Teams, and we can then address some of these. And if there are too many questions for the time available, we would be able to get back to you on any burning issues. So I'll quickly move on. I'm remiss in that I didn't introduce myself at the start, so apologies. I'm Rab Dixon from Nestrans, and I think I'm next on the agenda to just give a quick update on our regional transport strategy. So I'll just go straight into that. If Nikki can share my slides, thank you. And then if you just nip through them, that's me. That's what I'm talking about. So the background. Nestrans' primary function really is to develop and deliver a long-term strategy. So we've always taken the view that we required about a 20-year vision. And our original regional transport strategy in 2008 covered the period up to about 2028 and was really about new infrastructure, particularly the Western Peripheral Route, Kintour Station, which are the two photographs there, elements around park and ride, improving public transport and active travel. And actually much of that has been delivered in the period since. And so we felt it was important that we take cognizance of that and develop a new strategy at this time, not least taking account of the changing environment that we have in terms of the increasing importance of climate and other aspects, and that really a new type of strategy was required. If we can move on to the next one, Nikki, thank you. So we've been looking at a new strategy, Nestrans 2040, and very much taking account of the National Transport Strategy NTS2, which was released about this time last year by Transport Scotland. We seek to lock in the benefits of the recent investment, particularly the Western Peripheral Route. So we see this strategy as less about the big infrastructure and more about how we use that effectively and efficiently. We do have to recognise, as I said, that there has been a changing place in which we work, particularly the increasing importance given to climate change and the Scottish Government's directorate in terms of climate change plan. In particular, that climate change plan update, which includes a target or a commitment to reduce car traffic by 20% by the year 2030, which isn't far away if we're all honest. We regard the strategy as being aspirational yet realistic. So trying to get that fine line between making sure that we're aiming high, but that we're aiming for something that's achievable. And it's also a balanced strategy. So it looks at public transport, it looks at active travel, it looks at freight, obviously, and other aspects, including road building where it's deemed necessary. It's founded on 4 key principles. They would be promoting equality across the North East, reducing our impact on climate change and protecting the environment, helping the North East economy prosper, and improving the health and well-being across the North East. All of these pulling together in a vision to provide a safer, cleaner, more inclusive and accessible transport system, contributing to healthier, more prosperous and fairer communities. So what would that look like? We really felt that it was important that we identified some objectives or priorities that we wanted the members of our board to be able to say, because of this strategy, things are going to be different in the future. We're looking for improved journey efficiencies and enhancing connectivity, both within the region and from the region to our major markets. We're looking to reduce carbon in particular to support the move towards a net zero network. Accessibility for all, target of 0 fatalities on the road network. Air quality, which is cleaner than the standards for emissions from transport, and a step change in public transport and active travel, enabling a mode shift to approximating 50-50, that being half of journeys being done by sustainable travel, but recognising that half of journeys will probably always be a demand and a need for cars in a region like ours. So after 2 years of development, including members' workshops, engagement with the public and with stakeholders, consultative forum meetings and a number of policy papers, we worked through to a consultative draft of a strategy which we released in the summer of 2020. Difficult times in terms of pandemics and restrictions on being able to meet. So that was predominantly, if not exclusively, an online consultation. And we actually got a fairly good response, probably better than we would have had in normal circumstances, I suspect. And we were able to take back a finalised strategy to the Nestrans board on the 10th of February, which was approved by the board with some very minor changes. So we now have a finalised strategy. Next one. That finalised strategy is based on 18 topics. It has over 100 actions identified. And I guess the key themes would be around city centre reimagining. So we're looking at the potential for rapid transit and improved public transport, better buses, better active travel within the city centre. We're looking at active travel across the region to contribute towards health and environmental outcomes. We're looking at enhanced connectivity through fit-for-purpose road links, both within the region, such as the A96 and A90 to Peterhead, but also the links to the south towards the motorway network at Perth. Focusing on an alternative energy region, and I think the next speaker is Louise, who will talk to us a little bit about some of the hydrogen aspirations, but also recognising the challenges and difficulties of people who live or work in rural areas, and then a focus as well on rail enhancements, both cross-rail within the region and linking Aberdeen and the region to other cities across the national network. Next one, Nikki. Just quickly on freight, I think for me the importance is that one of those 18 topics is freight. We like to think that freight isn't just a forgotten add-on, but is actually a key part of what we're trying to achieve within the strategy. And what we're looking at is facilitating the efficient movement of freight. So the proposals are around trunk roads, about freight routing, which Nikki has touched on, encouraging mode shift, whether to rail freight or to sea freight, where that's appropriate, and also a bit of a focus on last mile logistics and reducing emissions where we can. There's also a key chapter on air and sea connections, ensuring that connectivity from the region to major markets is maintained and improved where possible. So this is my final slide. You'll be glad to hear. Our next step really is to finalise the finalised version, i.e. get it made up into a production which can be submitted to Scottish ministers. We're hoping to do that within the next 2 to 3 weeks. I suspect we won't get an approval prior to the Scottish election, but hopefully some point over this summer we will get an approval from Scottish ministers. And we can then input that to the Transport Scotland Strategic Transport Projects Review, which is basically their key projects over the next 20 years on a national basis. And we felt it was important to have a strategy that we could feed into that discussion. We'll be looking at monitoring baseline and the delivery plan, including targets as the key elements of how we will then work through that strategy and make sure that it is a working document, not just something that gets put on a shelf. So hopefully that gives a quick run through, a quick overview of the key elements of that. I wanted members of the forum to be aware of it and where we are and what our priorities are. So again, if there are any questions, please put them in the chat box, or we can have a discussion at the end. Thank you. I now hand over, if I may, to Louise Napier and colleagues who are going to give us a bit of an update on H2 Aberdeen. Louise.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you for the opportunity to have a chat with everyone. This will be a collective effort between myself, Sandra and Rachel. We all work in the hydrogen team on a variety of hydrogen projects, delivering in the main transport at the moment. And certainly I have a background in transport. Rob was my first manager, just in case anybody wanted to know. I'm sure that's not of interest. But anyway, what we hope to do is present the hydrogen picture in Aberdeen and then give you an idea about some of the work that we've been doing on fleets, and finally wrap up with where we'd like to be as a region and what opportunities there might be. So we could just head to the next slide. I won't belabor this too much. I don't know what the Freight Forum's view is on Europe and the necessity of getting into Europe, but Europe still heavily influences our current policies for hydrogen. They have a hydrogen policy document for climate neutral Europe, and I suspect that all vehicles entering Europe will still need to comply with this. The Scottish Government also has been driving quite hard on hydrogen. They recently released a hydrogen policy statement in December, and you can read it there, but it basically says commitment to working across sectors, and the need for new petrol and diesel heavy vehicles will be removed by 2035. And the expectation is that there will be a joint electric and hydrogen future, with smaller vehicles likely being electric, larger vehicles likely being hydrogen. And we're actually anticipating that the Scottish Government will release a hydrogen action plan later on this year, and that will be followed by a UK hydrogen strategy as well, detailing what they require for vehicles in terms of hydrogen adoption. So if we could head to the next slide after that. And Aberdeen is very much at the forefront of this energy transition. It says recently, it was actually June last year, it feels like last month, we adopted a net zero vision to become a climate positive city, particularly hydrogen being one of the energy transition projects that was coming through, because it offers significant economic opportunity for the region as we transition out of oil and gas and repurpose ourselves as an energy city. And we, as a council, have approved plans to replace all of our vehicles with alternatively powered vehicles, of which hydrogen will be one. And Aberdeen is actually one of the first places to adopt a hydrogen strategy in the UK. We've had one since 2015, We are constantly revising it because hydrogen is one of the fastest moving sectors that certainly I know of. And as I say, there's a real economic opportunity. It's not only for environmental purposes, but transitioning to hydrogen offers a North Sea workforce opportunities for different jobs in the future. Hydrogen is after all a gas, and we are now known as a centre of excellence. We've just been having discussions with a lot of businesses from Japan to California recently and across Europe, and we are actually in danger of missing the hydrogen boat if we want to be at the forefront of deploying this technology. That's what these companies have been telling us. So keen to see hydrogen promoted, but I'll let the other ladies let them tell you what we've been up to. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Nikki.
Hello everyone, I'm Rachel. It's lovely to meet you all. And so, as we were just talking about, there's a great deal of hydrogen activity in Aberdeen. We have 2 hydrogen refueling stations. There's one that's in Kitty Brewster, that was the first one that was opened, and it can refuel 350 bar, which is the important one for the larger vehicles, and also 700 bar. And we have one to the south of the city in Cove called Aches, and that also can do the 350 and the 700 bar refueling. And they have a different amount of kilograms in hydrogen for each of them. Aches is a smaller unit and it has 130, whereas at Kitty Brewster it's 360 kilograms a day that's produced. And both of them produce off of a green tariff, so it's entirely green hydrogen that's produced, and they're publicly accessible. So it's pretty exciting stuff. And then if you could move to the next slide, please. So we use these refueling stations to refill an array of vehicles. We have one of the most diverse hydrogen vehicle fleets in the whole of Europe. We have some smaller vehicles. There's, down on the bottom row, a fuel cell car in the middle there, which is a Nexo. And to the left of that, there is a Toyota as well. And we also have coming some pedelecs, which are fuel cell as well. And they'll be similar to the cargo bikes that were in the Civitas Portus, but they'll run off of hydrogen instead. And then we also have the larger vehicles, which is probably what you guys are more interested in. So we started with the original buses, which were fuel cell as well. And now we've got 15 new double-deckers, the first in the world, fuel cell buses. And then we have a dual fuel road sweeper, which is down in the bottom corner there. And that has diesel, and then it also has hydrogen put through the internal combustion engine at the same time, and that reduces the carbon emissions. We have a large waste truck that's dual fuel, that's up at the top there, and we're soon to be getting a fuel cell waste truck as well. Then the next slide, please. So this just explains some of the technology I was speaking about earlier. So there's obviously battery vehicles, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, the idea of there being a battery inside the vehicle that fuels it. And then there's fuel cell, which is where you incorporate hydrogen into the electric, and that's what we're really aiming towards. Then there's these 2 alternative options, which are sort of bridging technologies that are helpful in the current situation. So there's the fuel cell range extended electric vehicle, which is actually what the EV 200 that was mentioned in Nikki's presentation was. So that was an electric vehicle that had the range extended by adding a fuel cell as well. So that allowed for further mileage and it to carry a greater bulk at the same time. And it's also a good preparation for winter, as electric vehicles don't often perform all that well in the cold. And then there's also the dual fuel that I was mentioning, which is incorporating hydrogen into a diesel engine. And this is something that's really helpful as a bridging technology for larger vehicles and for vehicles that are newer. So if you've recently just purchased an Euro 6 massive vehicle that was quite an expensive piece of kit, you don't want to just straight away have to buy a new thing. So you can incorporate hydrogen into it and reduce your emissions by about 30% on average. So that's great news. Next one, please. Okay, so here we are. We've got a picture at the bottom corner there of our dual fuel, and above it is some of the statistics about how much saving that's been making. So in January, you can see that it managed to save 600 kilograms of CO2, which is quite remarkable. And that's when it's only doing about 30 to 35% of savings by having the hydrogen for that level. So it's really quite marked that you can save that much by incorporating a small amount of hydrogen relative. So it's really impressive technology that should be taken quite seriously as a good bridging technology. And then to the left, we have a technical drawing of our fuel cell waste truck, and this will be the first ever to be deployed in the UK and one of the first in Europe. So it's exciting new technology that Aberdeen is at the forefront of and should be taken advantage of, I think. And I'll pass over to my colleague Sandra now.
Hi, I'm Sandra. So just with the Holthausen truck, the new fuel cell truck that we'll be receiving, this just shows how Aberdeen City Council is quite keen to trial all these technologies, and we're quite keen to even trial them with you if any of you would be interested in the Freight Forum. And this here is a vehicle technology roadmap that Cenex prepared. Cenex is one of the consultants we've been working with, based in Loughborough, and it just shows how the technology is going to improve. Now, the most relevant just for this forum today would be the RCVs and the HGVs. So as you can see, at the moment, there's been a lot of trialing, and around 2025 onwards, more RCVs will be entering the market. And then we'll see the HGVs also being trialed. And then 2030 onwards, as the technology develops, we'll get longer ranges and better efficiencies as well. So that means they'll be more deployed in the area from 2030 onwards. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So last year, Aberdeen City Council, in partnership with Opportunity Northeast and Scottish Enterprise, we appointed Cenex to undertake a fleet study. So this was for 12 organisations, that's Aberdeen City, Aberdeenshire, Angus and Moray Council, and also Highland Council, and some of our community partners. And then we also had in the private sector, Scottish Water and Royal Mail. So we appointed Cenex to just review all our fleet. So that was around 4,000 vehicles. And they were to assess the most appropriate zero emission vehicle. So whether it's battery or hydrogen. And out of all our fleet, they found that 57% were compatible for battery and 32% for hydrogen. Now, what you have to notice, what you have to pay attention to is that the ones that are battery compatible are also hydrogen compatible. So the hydrogen could do the job that the battery vehicle can do as well. As part of that, you can see the graph at the bottom right. So most of the vehicles that were compatible for fuel cell hydrogen were the larger vehicles. So most of all of them are 7.5 tons or larger. As part of the study as well, Cenex undertook a market assessment. And one of the things that they found out was the availability of right-hand vehicles is going to be quite a challenge in the UK. At the moment, the UK makes up approximately 10% of the EU HGV sales. And so that's quite small compared to the left-hand market in Europe. So that's one of the challenges that we're going to be facing as we come up to 2025. But we've got the option to work with niche integrators like Acola or Ulemco. So Ulemco is the company that actually worked on our road sweeper. So they're the ones that did the dual fuel road sweeper. So there's options to work with them in terms of bridging technology. Next slide, please. Thanks. So there's a lot of interest in hydrogen out there. There's been large orders, so in China and also in Switzerland. And all this just goes to show that you need a huge demand. You need a huge demand in order to establish the economies of scale. Now, as part of the fleet study, what Aberdeen City Council is looking to do over the next few weeks and months is to see how we can consolidate demand. We've been having discussions with the likes of Highland and Aberdeenshire to just see how we can come together as part of a joint procurement to reduce the prices of hydrogen vehicles. And we're also looking to come together to see how we can, as part of a procurement, to undergo dual fuel as a bridging technology. Thank you. Having said that, there's been advancement in the battery market as well. So like the Ford Transit, and we believe that the EV market is appropriate for light fleet vans, but we also think that there's room for both. And for hydrogen, we think that hydrogen would be better placed to do the longer ranges and would be more appropriate for trucks. And you can fuel them in about 8 to 12 minutes. And also the refueling infrastructure would take minimal space, and they're also easily upgradable. I mean, that's if you also compare them to the battery vehicles, which take approximately 6.5 to 11 hours to charge for the bigger trucks, and that's on a fast or a rapid charger. Next slide, please. And just Senex also undertook they did a mapping exercise for us. So they mapped all the potential locations for hydrogen refueling stations. And so this is all the way north from Inverness to Forfar, and including the two refueling stations in Aberdeen. So these refueling stations, they're based on actually the fleet demand of all the 12 organizations. And we believe that the infrastructure could actually form the basis of hydrogen refueling, a hydrogen refueling network, particularly for HGVs. And we think this can be used by both the public and the private sector. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just finish off. The purpose of why we're trying to pull together all of this work is essentially, as I said at the beginning, we want Aberdeen to become the centre of excellence for hydrogen deployment. And we're particularly pursuing this Aberdeen Hydrogen Hub agenda, where we think we can really bring hydrogen into the North East economy. And we're looking at all of our city council sites to see whether there's scope for hydrogen applications for transport, for heating, and then finally for export. And we're speaking to Transport Scotland about rail applications, and Aberdeen Harbour Board as well. We have been having a couple of conversations with them about maritime applications too. At the moment, hydrogen is more expensive. It's £10 a kilogram to produce, we sell it at £10 a kilogram rather. That is nowhere near diesel parity. Diesel parity would be around £6 a kilogram. I imagine in the freight industry, you're probably paying less as well because you're buying diesel in bulk. So we really need to get it to under that mark to make it competitive. And that's partially what the Hydrogen Hub is doing. By consolidating our demand, we can reduce not only vehicle prices, but also diesel fuel prices as well. I think we'll probably leave it there. I think Rachel's got one more thing to say on the last slide.
Yeah.
We could go to the last slide, Nikki. Thank you.
So it's just to say that we do have Twitter, LinkedIn, and we also have a playlist on YouTube that could be helpful to understand some of the questions that some of you may be asking. So it has information on how to refuel vehicles and things like that at the hydrogen station. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you very much, all three of you. There is one question has popped into the chat from Andrew Malcolm, asking what's the mileage range on a 44-ton hydrogen fueled truck? Is that something you would like to take as a verbal question, or can we get an answer back either in the chat or after the meeting?
I mean, I can give you a quick response now.
Yeah,
and that is that I don't know the answer. The vehicles that we have been trialling are 26 ton. That's the maximum that we've done so far. And they tend to, the hydrogen diesel, it tends to be, I think it's around 8 kilograms, and that can do about 60 miles, 70 miles on hydrogen. But of course, you still then have the diesel as backup. That's retrofitted. Fuel cell electric is something different again. So we'll need to get back to you, but the problem is there's just not much on the market.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. I know you've got to leave us at some point, Louise, but thank you. And hopefully, if there is discussion, we can take it in the round at the end. And if there's anything we can't answer, we'll make sure you get told about it.
Yes, I can carry on the good work of not replying properly or not answering questions. Okay.
That's great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Number 5 on the agenda then is a few issues round about the national agenda. And I was going to call in initially Jim May from Transport Scotland to give us a brief overview, if I may, Jim.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Can you hear me
A little bit fuzzy, but we can hear you, Jim.
I'll turn up a little bit. Is that any better? How's that? To be honest, I'll be short and sweet. I mean, I had a 10-minute slot. Unfortunately, I was supposed to be sharing the slot with 2 of the colleagues. One person who deals with our freight grants, who unfortunately is off sick today, not COVID related, good to say, and another colleague who works on rail freight, but unfortunately she's been able to make it because she had to do some work for ministers. So I've got a quick rundown of what I've been doing over the last 12 months, and it may be of interest, most likely isn't, but I'll let you know anyway. As you can imagine, up until January, February time, a lot of the work in my team had been around Brexit. I mean, we know that a lot of the Brexit issues are reserved, but there's still a lot of niche Scottish issues we had to look at. One of the classic was the movement of fresh seafood from Scotland to the EU, a huge problem if we couldn't get through the Dover. Another thing we're looking at as well is obviously getting goods to Northern Ireland. We looked at, do we need lorry parking? Do we need to make ferry space available at a more appropriate price? Looked at all these things. There have been issues that have not been as bad as they could have been because there was a deal, but it still hasn't been smooth sailing. And if we're being honest, there's still a lot of work to be done for Brexit to be a success. Not that your viewpoint on whether it will ever be a success, of course. That apart, a big problem we've had because of COVID has been a lot of driver issues. Now, Martin's here from the RHA today, and as Martin will confirm, right at the start of COVID, there was big problems around, which, unless you're in the industry, you'll find hard to believe, drivers getting access to washing facilities, eating facilities, toilets. There was a lot of work the Scottish Government had to put in to try and get some movement on that. And like I say, I'm preaching the converted here. If you worked in the industry, you know there's been traditional problems with this. It was magnified because of COVID, and isolated incidents are still occurring at the moment. So I'm not saying that these issues have all been ironed out. However, things are in a much better place now than we were 12 months ago. Talking about COVID, there is the question of vaccines. Industry has been asking, should or can HGV drivers or other members of the logistics sector be given priority vaccines? It is something that we're actually looking at the moment, but no decision has been taken. But evidence is being gathered, and ministers will be in a position to make a decision. Once more, I was speaking to Martin on this issue a couple of days ago, and because of the age profile of a large number of HGV drivers, the reality may well be that by the time a decision is made, it will be overtaken by the fact that drivers in their 50s and 60s will have been vaccinated anyway. So we'll see where we are, but at the moment, we're gathering evidence, and that evidence is to go forward to ministers for a decision. Driver training has been another issue that has cropped up over the last 12 months because of COVID. As you can imagine, training has been curtailed right across all sectors in the UK, and logistics sector has been no exception. It's been very difficult to get training done when it's been involved in classroom work. It has been easier for companies, the larger companies, who do their own in-house training. But even then, it's been very difficult for them to do the training. Once more, it's very similar to where we are with vaccines. We've been looking at, can we increase the training being given? Once more, the silver bullets of vaccines, it looks like if the vaccines continue to be a success, it may well be that by the summertime, we could be nearly back to normal and training's nearly back to normal. I don't want to go into 48, something that Andrew's going to speak on later on, just to say that it's a proposition from Malcolm's about how to make more efficient use of the rail sector. What I just want to say just now is I want an apology, because this project has been in discussion with the Scottish Government for a long time, but it's because it's in discussion with the Scottish Government, the UK Government and the Welsh Government. When you're dealing with 3 sets of officials and 3 sets of ministers, it seems to take forever for any decision to be made. So it's just to say to Andrew, I'm sorry that things seem to be taking so long to get back to you, but you're dealing with a government times 3, and that's not a recipe anybody wants to deal with, if we're being honest. I mentioned earlier on that one of my colleagues who couldn't make it today deals with freight grants, and it's just to make people aware that the Scottish Government, we do grants on freight for the freight industry. Basically, in a limited number of ways, if you want to remove HGVs from the road and put things onto rail, we may be able to help you with costs. And if anybody has a scheme, contact me through RAB and I'll see if it's a goer, if we can help fund it. Also, unfortunately, my colleague Fiona Hesling, she does a very similar job on getting things from road to rail, and she's going to give some detail on lots of money that may be available. But if anyone's got any ideas about getting things from road onto rail, run it by me. I can speak to my colleague Justin or to Fiona, and we'll see if we can help you. And one last quick thing, it's something that may be of interest, that we've been in discussion with the Department for Transport. They've been doing a piece of work over the last 18 months, and it's looking at speaking to people who are in jail and trying to find, can they be trained and get work in the logistics sector? Because one of the big things about the prison service is it's re-educating and giving people a chance so that they can change their life around. Now, they've had a bit of success in England, the Department for Transport, and now they've been speaking to us to say that, is this something they could maybe roll out in Scotland? We're at very early stages, but I just wanted to raise it because I may come back to the industry in the future and say, is this something anybody wants to consider getting involved with? And that was just it, just to highlight this. There has been successes in England, but it doesn't mean that it's going to happen in Scotland. And really, that was it, Rab, because like I say, I'll have a small segment because my colleagues were going to fill up the 10-minute slot. Unfortunately, at the last minute, neither could make it.
Okay, thanks, Jim. It's always good, though, to get Transport Scotland and the national executive involved. So pleased that you could join us today, and thanks for that brief summary and run through. That maybe takes us on then. I think we're going to get a response from Aberdeen Grampian Chamber of Commerce, which I think Lorraine is going to take on. Can I hand over to you, Lorraine?
Yes, you can, but I'm sure Shane's going to back him up there.
I've no doubt. I'd be surprised if he didn't chip in.
You know him well. Right, hi, Lorraine. I've worked at the Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce in the international department now for about 13, 14 years. And I can honestly say the last year has been, would we say, the one with the most challenges. What we have been finding, we've been speaking to our members, trying to sort out, make the smooth transition from the EU to as easy as we can possibly for our members. We have had a few issues, and it would be interesting again, what Jim was saying about the fish. Yeah, we've been there, done that. We've been trying to get fish through from the ferry to Netherlands, from over the Roro at Dover, and yes, there is challenges. One of the big challenges we did find was that each of the fish has its own commodity code. And the commodity code is sort of like the world-known recognition for that product. And technically speaking, what's supposed to happen is if you type in this code into the tariff, it will tell you exactly what you need to get your goods exported or imported into the country. But unfortunately, what it says on the government tariff doesn't always match up with what the systems say. and we are working on that. We've had a few issues with it. Liam Smith, the International Director for British Chambers of Commerce, is more or less in weekly conversations with HMRC, feeding back all the problems and the issues. And we are winning. It's getting there. It is getting easier. And again, this week, gosh, time flies so quickly. Shane and I had a conversation direct with HMRC again, trying to say, this is the issues we've had. We've got to get it smooth. As of the beginning of April, again, there is some more changes to the procedure. And then again in July, there is even more changes to the procedures. And I think it will both probably affect the hauliers more, because if you're taking in any products with animal products in them, it's all change again. So what we at the Chamber do is we've set up what we call Chamber Customs. It's sort of like just to help our members and anybody else that actually needs us out there to process some customs entries for them. What we do sort of say is compliance. We won't put anything through there that we don't think is right. We take very great care that your VAT is going to be right, your duty is going to be right, and we would sort of like point you in the right direction, what you should be doing, where you should be going for advice, how you can postpone the VAT on the goods. It's quite important, even though we have got the agreement with the EU and most of the goods have got nil duty, there is still VAT to be paid on these goods. So again, you have got to put that through your VAT books and everything. So we're there. What I'm trying to say is we were there if any of your members need any help, or we can point you in the right direction. And we would very much like, even if we could even hear some of your issues, because what we want to do again is bring it to the attention to the people that might be able to do something about it. So I'm going to say, I'm sure Shane will add his little bit too of you.
Okay, thanks very much, Lorraine. Shane, anything to add to that?
Rav, as you know, I can't really say anything in a short space of time, so I'll probably keep things relatively brief. I think, as Lorraine said, I guess one of the key things I guess be useful to hear from is, I guess, if you guys as hauliers, if there's anything you're consistently seeing from customers that is causing challenge for you, that we can feed that back to our broader network, whether it's sort of lessons learned thing or specific challenges that you're seeing from customers in your own point of view. It'd be helpful to understand that. Outside of that, I mean, I'll drop a quick piece just in the chat. It's our latest Brexit survey. As Lorraine mentioned, I think our largest concern, I guess, at the moment is that obviously we've got further checks coming in April and July, whether it's the phytosanitary checks on imports or the fuller customs checks. So we are actually calling on government to push that back. We don't necessarily think there's the right level of preparedness for that, but again, be interested to hear views. But I think the open thing is, as Lorraine has said, obviously we've got that Chamber Customs service that might be able to support in some of the practical issues, but also be keen to hear from members of the forum here around any issues we can feed back into the broader business community, just to streamline things a little bit as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks for the brevity, Shane.
It's much appreciated.
If everyone's happy with that, thanks for that invitation from the Chamber to feed things in, and I'm sure people have your contacts if there are anything that they feel you can be of value. So thank you for that. I'm going to take this opportunity to move over to Andrew Malcolm, who's going to talk to us about 48 for 48. Andrew.
Yes, thank you very much, Rob, and good afternoon, everybody. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. I will try and keep the subject as brief as I can, although I do have quite a detailed presentation I've been using over the last probably three and a half years on the same subject, which I can share, which will give you some more background. The Malcolm organisation, we're in our 99th year, so I think we're quite well knowledge and experienced in the road transport sector, and we're now in our 20th year of running a fully integrated road transport and rail operation. And we understand how the two combinations work. I think one thing people have to remember in life that roads can survive without rail, but rail cannot survive without road. But we need to bring the two together as one mode and one option of how we move things forward. One of our key objectives in Malcolm's, being a private company, is investing money wisely, but very much investing money in the future that can respond to the day. Our motto, practical solutions, successful partnerships. They have to work in practice, not only in theory. Hence the reason why we're always looking at solutions. And in that case, we're quite innovative in a lot of ways. The DfT and the UK government have announced this week that the 10-year trial in longer length trailers, what we call the LST, has now been concluded after 8 years. We in the Malcolm Group were one of the first parties to get involved in that. In fact, today we're running nearly 250 items under license agreement, proving we can carry 15% more product on the same number of vehicles. So our whole objective in life is to move more volume with less trucks on the road. And although I'm a trucker at heart, born and bred, certainly I see the importance of them, but I also see the challenges of them as well. With the driver shortage, the ageing driver, as Jim mentioned, congestion on the roads, and just generally the whole green issue that's there. So we've won awards on other different things as well for innovation and sustainability, which is very good. I asked a question about hydrogen fuel. We've been doing some trials now for over 2 years on LNG fuel. For running our vehicles of 44-ton gross vehicle weight, which is probably 95% of what we operate, capacity is a big issue. We need to get a minimum 200 miles on day shift, but we must get 440 miles on night shift when we do most of our long haul distribution. So that becomes a challenge. And the LNG is nearly there, but not quite. We've had to suspend our trials this week, and I've been involving the Transport Minister, Michael Matheson, and other parties on this, that really by the middle of March, there are no LNG fuel supplies north of North Yorkshire or down in Lancashire, as we currently have the only fueling station in Scotland, and the main supplier, BOC, is pulling out of that market. So that creates its own challenges, the opportunities as well. So we're looking at that. But let me move more on to the kind of the 48 for 48 tonnes. And how do you come up with the slogan? Well, 48 tonnes is what we want to move, to allow rail freight to be compatible and move the same goods, pallets and tonnes as a road-going vehicle. 48 miles is the mileage we've worked out throughout the whole of Scotland that allows most manufacturers to reach a rail terminal, right, with the heavier weight. So it's a bit of a slogan, 48 for 48 is the key objective on that. The first slide you see in front of you there just now shows two identical vehicles, one with a shipping line container and one with a conventional road-going vehicle. The main difference there is the container vehicle is 19.3 tonnes of a tear versus 15.5. So immediately the payload has to reduce on the vehicle with the container on its back. And that's probably what's driven us more and more of how we take things going forward. Nicola, can you next slide, please? This footprint quite simply shows the capacity difference. So you can see to carry the same number of pallets footprint, which is 26 on a conventional 13.6 metre curtain, and the same with the container, we have to run virtually at 3.8 tonnes either underweight or overweight, depending which way you look at it. So two vehicles leaving, let's say, a bottling hall or a distillery in Scotland, one going by rail has to carry virtually about 3/4 pallets less in payload than the vehicle with the curtain cider. So before we even start, getting parity from road to rail is a major challenge. So although the cost by rail could be beneficial, the cost per pallet, which comes down to, could be more costly. So this has been the driver behind trying to get the parity on the weights, how we move forward from that point. If I add to this slide as well that I didn't show, a number of years ago, W.H. Malcolm won an innovation award for, we brought out a container which was actually it went from 13.6 to 15.6 metres in length. Now that gives us another 4 pallets, another 15% carrying capacity. On rail freight today, the majority of what we move north is bulk for most of the retailers. So we cube out north, but we're way out going south. Because going south, we're either taking board, Norboard, we've got water, Highland Springs, we've got spirit, we've got paper products. So everything we're taking south is dense. So immediately we lose out on what can go south. Most things going south still go by road. So again, that became one of the key challenges here. How can we get parity and get more goods from road to rail? Nicola, can you take me to the next one, please? So again, you can see here the similar slide with a different part on it that we've got there. Sorry, Nicola. That's the one. That's the one. Thank you very much indeed for that. So, summarising just where we are there just now, as I've said, through our key objective is to get more volume onto rail. And again, to do that, we need to get more capacity. Today, Scotland is an importer from England rather than an exporter from to England on domestic traffic. I would say today, probably on road transport, today, for every 3 trucks that come into Scotland, 1 goes back out. Rail freight is no different. The problem with rail freight is even harder now to backhaul on the back of the differentials on the weight limits and the road operations that go with that from there. Okay, Nicola? So, key objectives, what we need to do and why we need to do it. So again, we want to try and get everything onto a level playing field. It is achievable, it is doable, and we know it can be done. Most of what we do moving WH Malcolm, really we're a bulk mover. One thing we are exceptionally good at without blowing our own trumpet here, we can move volume, and key is where we're trying to. Hence one of the reasons we brought in the LST trailers. Most of our LST trailers run between England and Scotland, moving volume during the hours of darkness as well, to be more environmentally friendly and efficient as well. Again, we're trying more domestic cargo off of road onto rail. So our proposal and discussion over the last 3 to 4 years with all the governments and all the governing bodies was very much on domestic rail. We're now running rail out of 2 of our terminals in Scotland to deep sea ports. This now brings deep sea ports shipments again away from 44 tonnes to 48, allowing more volume to be shipped. And a lot of our countries across the world already run at heavier weights than we do in the UK. Again, this gives the whole of the Scottish economy an opportunity to move the same volume of freight at a lower cost per unit. And no matter what way we run trucks or don't run trucks, at the end of the day, everything breaks back down to the cost per pallet, the cost per case, or the cost per unit. And that's what life's all about. It's trying to be something that's cost effective, efficient, and most importantly, it's sustainable for the medium to long term. So when we say practical solutions, successful partnerships, what WH Malcolm brings to the table for discussion is not a theoretical solution, it's a practical solution that we know does works that way. Again, we've got driver shortage I mentioned, and again, what we're trying to do there. The driver shortage, what Jim says, the average age of drivers, they are in their late 50s. There's no doubt in that. We in Malcolm's, we're sitting probably more in the mid to late 40s. But again, we have our own haulage college, we trade in-house, we develop through, but our industry does not get a lot of bonus points for how we look after our drivers in our sector. It's not a sector that's attractive, it's not as sexy as other sectors, but it's a sector that is important and required. So again, the key thing for us is trying to make sure that what we have is quality, not quantity. And this helps us along that route. Okay, Nicola? So as I move on to the second last page here. Everything in life, unfortunately, we find when you come into new dynamics and new ways of working, they're always there to be abused. We have worked very hard to try to bring into place some already in practice principles of how you control and how you direct this project. STGO is a route planning operation for out of heavy loads and out of gauge loads. It's in place and it works under designated routes and controlled routes, and the vehicles are actually identified with an STGO category 1, 2 or 3 plate. We run them today, it works well, so these come under that. Vehicle tracking nowadays, again, every truck we have and trail we have is fully tracked. So again, we can track and report and trace what we do. Basic and also driver training. We already give our drivers special training for running with LST trailers. This is the next stage of natural development on the back of that. So we look at other things on alternative fuels. Again, we've gone with the 48 for 48, which all that does is give parity with road transport and rail freight, compare them. What we have suggested, there is scope for this to go heavier. It may be 50 tonnes for 50 miles, but on that, it should be alternative fuels, should be mandatory. So again, we look at the alternative fuels, whether it's HNG or it's LNG or electric one day. We start to drive the whole economy onto a cleaner tomorrow, but we start doing that today. And again, we look at the licenses and what the compliance is. There's opportunities to offer incentives there with grant funding that we currently enjoy through rail or investment on the actual road fleet itself. Okay, Nicola, I think we're on to the last one. So where do we sit today? We've been through quite a long in-depth and a very healthy and constructive process on the journey. The consultation with the DFT in Westminster closed on the 4th of January, so it's now been concluded. I believe, and I would say this, but I do believe there is support from multiple different organisations and a lot of the governing bodies. Now we have to get through really to make sure this can actually work. Again, all the rail freight carriers are on board. Most of my competitors are on board. We've discussed. The other key thing, which was quite crucial in this, the way the UK trucks are specified today, along with the trailers that are likewise on them, there's very, very little investment required from the road haulage industry to make this work in practice. The current fleet of trucks that are out there today, 90% of them are spec'd for 50 tons, design weight. Everything out there today can turn towards running at the heavier weights. So again, the investment cost for this project is not as significant for any operator that's out there. And again, I'm cautiously optimistic. I've always said from day one, and Jim knows this, I believe this is a project Scotland can lead. We've got one key customer we have just now up in Stirling, and we're moving anywhere between 80 and 100 loads a week for them, all by rail, and it runs right into a rail-connected warehouse in England. The only part of the journey is an 18-mile journey from the factory to a rail terminal in Grangemouth. So fundamentally, what we're doing just now is trying to put something in place that we know will work in practice, but also encourage people to move from conventional road movements onto a combination of road and rail. So, Rob, I don't know what my time was like in that. I hope I didn't go on too long. So I do apologise if I did, but I'm welcome to take questions at the end. Thanks very much, Andrew. I think you were almost exactly spot on. If you want a brownie point or two. Logistics on time every time. Yeah, I wish. Absolutely. But yeah, if you're happy enough to hang around, if there are any questions, we'll keep them to the end if that's okay. And that will give us an opportunity to move on to some of the more local specific items on the agenda, the projects that are there. I think we've got Ross Stevenson with us from Aberdeen City Council. Hello, Ross. And he's going to talk to us about some work they're doing in traffic management terms around the Golf Road, School Road area. Ross, can I hand over to you?
Yes, I'll be quite quick. On Golf Road, this has been the Seaton community in Aberdeen have had historic concerns about the use of School Road, Golf Road, Park Road as an HGV route. We have, up until the AWPR and the third Don crossing, this route has been classed as a local distributor. However, with the new roads hierarchy, it's sort of changed its level of priority within the city. We've subsequently received a petition from the community, which was considered at committee. The committee directed us to look at options that we could improve road safety in the area, whether it was removing all traffic or whether it was just HGVs. And we looked at different options. The committee ultimately decided that they would like to introduce a width restriction on Golf Road between Regent Walk and Linksfield Road, and that went through the statutory consultation process early last year, and we publicly advertised it in October and November. There were no objections to the proposals at that time, and as such, the order came into effect at the end of January of this year and will be implemented. It's currently being implemented, and the restriction will come into enforcement in the next couple of weeks. And we will put out press releases, and we will, contact Nestrans and various people when the measures are completed and ready to go. That's really just a very quick summary of it.
Thanks, Ross, and thanks the brevity as well. So basically, we're talking about a width restriction of how wide?
Sorry, I should say that it's 2.1 metres width between Regent Walk and Linksfield Road. Okay,
so what you're looking for really from this group is to get information out to people who that would impact upon potentially.
Yes, we would be very grateful if you could distribute the information to your drivers, etc.
Excellent. Well, we're quite happy through the forum. We've got a list of contacts, and we're quite happy to make contacts. And Martin's here from RHA, I think, as well, who could maybe inform his members of that impending change. So it's actually been implemented now, but not yet enforced.
It's being implemented. They were putting signs up as it today. Right.
No, that's fine. I mean, just to be petty and pedantic. Great. Okay. If there's nothing else on that at the moment, I'll move on to Paul Finch, who's Transport Strategy Manager at Nestrans, and is going to take us through. I'll let him tell you what he's going to take us through. There you go. Over to you, Paul. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Rab, and thanks also to all the previous speakers who have a really interesting range of items to consider. Bringing it a bit more local, a little bit more regional, and there's three things that I'm just going to run through because they all kind of link together quite nicely in terms of the south side of the city. I'm going to talk about a project that's been progressing about improving the road links and some of the other transport links to the new Aberdeen South Harbour. I'm going to talk about a project that's been progressed about looking at issues and interventions on Wellington Road, and also kind of in between these two areas is an area, a development area called the Energy Transition Zone, which has been proposed and it's been progressed. I guess it fits into the economic development strategy, but again, interesting to see how this is progressing, particularly in respect of Louise's presentation earlier on the hydrogen thing. So if put on the next slide there. So this is the area of the city that we're interested in. Obviously, we've got the river Dee to the top, and you've got the communities of Torry, and really focusing in on that area of land of East Tallis, Ortons in there, particularly where you've got the new harbour. Aberdeen South Harbour is a key element in this area that's progressing. I can't speak necessarily on behalf of the Harbour Board, but I'm sure if they were here, they'd be talking about the impressive depth of the new harbour, 15 metres, the ability to handle longer ships, 300 metres berth, the large amounts of laydown area, the deep water length of quays that they've got there, and the fact that it's no longer tidally unrestricted. And as I understand from the publicity that Aberdeen Harbour Board have been putting out, they're gearing up for a phased opening in 2021. So that's great news for the region. Great news. It complements the region's capabilities with maritime capabilities, as well as the improvements that's happened recently up at Peterhead. And I know that Fraserburgh have also got a master plan to improve their facilities as well. So a really important thing for the region. The Harbour Board are progressing with links as per their planning application, but funding was secured through the region's city region deal to improve the access to that. So I'll come on to that in a minute. But anyway, that's where we are with the Harbour Board. Great news after a difficult year with COVID. They're bashing on and say looking forward to a phased opening later on this year or possibly into next. So that's great news for that one. If we move on to the next slide there, Nikki. I guess it's important as well to think not only about the Harbour Board, but also some of the other proposed developments in that area. And this is just a wee screenshot from the local development plan, which Aberdeen City are pushing through. And there's a real thrust to try and revitalise East Tallis and to complement on Ortons, just because they're really in the proximity of that new harbour, and looking to develop a new, what they're calling an energy transition zone in this area. So that energy transition zone would pick up on these areas that are marked as OP56, OP61. These are proposed sites in the development plan. They've still got to be approved, so they're still going through the consultation processes. So nothing's written in stone yet. But also looking at the existing industrial estates there. And as you can see, the Coast Road and Wellington Road are key elements in linking this whole area together. The energy transition zone is all about an area of facilities that can help the region transition to an affordable low energy economy, looking at formation of high value integrated net zero energy cluster. And that's about looking at the opportunities for offshore wind, floating wind, or fixed base wind, tidal hydrogen being generated offshore, then coming onshore into that area, and also solar. So really trying to tap into the skills that we have in this area of offshore, and then trying to see how that can be put into that northeast context with all the skills that we have here. And I was going to say that links in these sort of strategic greenfield sites, regeneration industrial areas, and thinking about high value manufacturing skills academies, and also perhaps making best use of the infrastructure and the supply bases that are already in that area as well. So that's two big things that are happening in this area. We've got the new harbour, and linked to this, we've got this proposal for an energy transition zone, and trying to help that being developed from the mid-2020s to the 2030s going forward, and seeking money from the government to help facilitate that. Go on to the next slide there. So there's the city region deal project to upgrade one of the links in that area, and there's been an option appraisal and a traffic modelling process being ongoing for the last few years looking at this. Just early in February, a preferred corridor went to the committee, and they were happy to support this proposed new corridor. You can see basically it's picking up on the improvements that were already put in place from the Harbour Board works, looking to improve the alignment and the capabilities of the current signal controlled crossing over the railway line on the coast road, and then also looking to improve the alignment, the geometry, and the capacity of the link between the bridge up to I think it's Hareness Road, where the road goes up through Altons. And when you're into Altons, you've got the opportunity to link into Hareness and also Suter Head as well. So that's the plan, and we're looking forward to pushing that one through to the next stage, which is the design basis, and continuing to draw down the money from the governments to implement that, hoping to have that implemented within the lifetime of the Aberdeen City deal, which is the next 5 years until that one expires or needs to be carried forward. Not just the road links, also looking at the active travel routes, and also some of these other elements. And it's interesting that this is also in quite close proximity to one of those hydrogen fueling stations that Louise was talking about as well. So next slide, please, Nikki. So the other major transport intervention in this area, and this is sitting just a little bit behind the work on external links, because we needed to have a decision on the external links before we could conclude the work on Wellington Road. So again, this has been an option study that's been looked at for a while. It links into what's been done at the harbour. It links into what's been done in the energy transition zone. We've identified sort of 7 individual links, bits of road there, and there's different options that we're working up for those roads. But there's sort of 3 overarching strategies that are being tested on these areas, and that's one that really maximizes the opportunities for active travel, one that looks at a far more balanced multimodal approach, including active travel and the bus movements, and then there's one that gives a significant public transport priority along those routes, but also HGV lanes perhaps shared with the buses as well. So these are the elements that are currently being tested along the route. It does also include land take outside the former prison, Craiginches, and remodelling of Hareness Junction as well. So these are the things that are in the air. There's been some preliminary consultation done on this. We're now doing the detailed work so we can actually get confidence as to what the impacts would be on these. And we're hoping to go out to consultation on these again in the summer. It also links to some of the work that the City Council have been consulting with South College Street as well in this area. So again, lots of change in this area, but it's important, particularly as it's like that key southern gateway to the city, and it's where so much of the economy, distribution centres and supply bases for the harbour are located. So it's important that we continue to invest in this area to make the work as efficient as possible, and also just to say make it easier for companies to be accessing the Western Peripheral Route, accessing the harbour, but also accessing their bases in this area. So I think, is that the last slide, I think there, Nikki? I think it is, yeah. Okay, so that's just where we are on a couple of economic development projects, but also trying to link in the roads infrastructure on the back of that economic development. So we've got a joined up picture. Okay, so thanks very much for listening. Happy if there's any questions after that, but I think we can possibly just keep the pace up, Rob.
Excellent, thanks, Paul. Spot on the 10 minutes as well. So throwing my brownie points about today.
Oh,
well done. That maybe takes us on. I think the last speaker this afternoon is Will Hecklar from Aberdeen City Council. So if I can hand over to Will. I see Nikki's got the first slide already on, so Will Hecklar, please.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me along today. My name is Will and I work for the Aberdeen City Council's Transport Department, and I'm currently project managing the implementation of the low emission zone. So today I'm just going to run through where we are at the moment in that process and what the next steps might be. As hopefully most of you are aware, we've been looking at options for a low emission zone for a few years now, and the main objective of the low emission zone is to protect public health by reducing air pollution. And we know that road traffic is the main source of pollution in Aberdeen, hence why a low emission zone is a potentially reasonable option to pursue in response to that. The important thing to say at the outset is that for the vast majority of traffic, the low emission zone should have a limited impact. It's only non-compliant vehicles that would be restricted from the zone, and that is petrol vehicles that are older than Euro 4, so roughly pre-2006 petrol vehicles, and diesel vehicles below Euro 6 standard, so roughly diesel vehicles older than 2015. The next slide just briefly shows where the main areas of concern are in Aberdeen city centre in terms of air pollution. So the red dots you can see on the map are areas where the monitoring locations show pollution in excess of the objective limits, which are the legal limits that are considered acceptable to human health. And the orange dots are those areas which are close to exceedance levels. So you can see it's really along that kind of King Street, Union Street, Holborn Street axis, and down into Virginia Street, Market Street, which are the main areas of concern. There's a few other areas of the city close to exceedance, such as Skene Square, which you can just see at the top of that picture, and also some areas around Anderson Drive and the Hadigan. But we're hopeful that the forthcoming Hadigan roundabout improvement scheme will address the latter at least. The next slide just shows that there's no real one group or class of vehicles that are responsible for pollution. That very much differs from street to street. So for in Union Street, you can see that the majority of emissions are caused by buses and coaches, just because they're one of the predominant vehicle types on that street. Whereas Market Street, in contrast, it's a bit more of an equitable split, with diesel cars responsible for almost a third of emissions, and heavy and light good vehicles combined, approaching half of the emissions. So the first thing to say, I suppose, first of all, is that the low emission zone must be logical, enforceable, and have reasonable alternative routes around it, which just to allow a vehicle approaching the zone to route around that zone if need be, a non-compliant vehicle, just to ensure that they're not inadvertently forced to enter the zone and face a fine. We started the process with a lot of options, 40 options, and whittled them down to 8, which were then taken out for public consultation and subject to traffic modelling and the new city centre traffic model that we developed for the purpose of this. In terms of the consultation, then we undertook a public and stakeholder engagement and consultation series of sessions in autumn last year. We had an online survey which received a fairly healthy number of responses. It was more than 500, and a mixture of businesses and individuals responding to that. We also held stakeholder workshops with a number of organisations and user groups, and there was a specific freight workshop that hopefully some of you managed to attend. Very much highlight summary of that consultation was that most people were aware of air quality issues, and in terms of support for low emission zones, that was roughly a 50-50 split, I would say, between those for and against. A lot of support for low emission zones expressed, particularly in terms of the health and environmental benefits that would bring, but also understandably a lot of concerns raised about the impacts on individuals, the impacts on businesses, and what the low emission zone might mean for access to the city centre and also the harbour, because some of the larger options potentially impact on harbour access. In terms of the freight workshop, this is very much a high-level, one-line summary of the takeaway from that, and I appreciate this is possibly a sweeping generalisation, but the outcome of that was that the freight industry, well, certainly those represented at the workshop, were reasonably confident that given the average lifespan of a large vehicle, that by the time we came to enforcing an LEZ, the majority of large vehicles on the road would be compliant. As I say, I'm more than aware that's open to challenge and doesn't cover every group or business, but that was, I suppose, given the limited number of people in that group, that was kind of the opinion expressed. If you pop on to the next slide. So following that consultation and engagement process, and following the first run of the options through the traffic model, there was two options that really came forward as the most promising in terms of public acceptability, but also their performance in the traffic model. These were the options that raised the least concerns in terms of where displaced traffic might go, what sort of rat running we might see from people trying to avoid the LEZ. So the first option to be shown to perform well was the option 1A on screen just now, which is actually one of the smallest options. As you can see, it's bound by West North Street, Virginia Street, and Willow Bank to the south, and Holborn Street to the west, School Hill to the north. And the other option to come forward in terms of, to be taken forward in response to its performance was option 4A, which is a much larger option, roughly following the boundary of the city centre master plan. But as you can see, the implications of that are potentially, well, are certainly more significant for both residents and businesses operating in the area. So based on that, another option has potentially come forward, which we're calling option 5, and that's potentially a best of both worlds option, in that it covers the main. It's a smaller option, similar to option 1A, but covers more exceedance locations than 1A, without necessarily encroaching into residential areas and some of the business areas that some of the larger options certainly do. So this is maybe a kind of compromise solution, for want of a better term, which will also go through the next stage of the process along with options 1A and 4A. So in terms of where we go next with these options, they will then go through another run of the traffic model to look at the implications of them and what sort of supporting traffic management or mitigation measures might be required to make them work as effectively as possible. They will also go through an air quality model to look at the different air quality impacts of each. And we're hopeful this work can take place over the next few months, allowing us to identify a preferred option around about June 2021 and report that to our committee. Following that, the legislation requires us to go out for another period of public and stakeholder consultation on the preferred option. And assuming that process doesn't throw any major spanners in the works, we'd be looking to formally publish the scheme around about September. That then triggers a 28-day period within which objections can be raised. But again, assuming that process goes smoothly and there are no insurmountable obstacles in the way, we'd be looking to formally seek formal approval for that scheme from our councillors and then Scottish ministers towards the end of 2021, early 2022, allowing us to formally declare the low emission zone in spring 2022. The last thing to say, because I know I'm probably running out of time, is that the legislation does allow for grace periods. So if we are successful in announcing an LEZ in spring 2022, the earliest period that enforcement would commence would be spring 2023, because there's a 1-year mandatory grace period in the legislation. That can be extended for up to 5 years for non-residents and up to 7 years for residents. So depending on what decisions are made by our elected members, enforcement may start in 2023. It may be slightly later than that. There's some contact details there, so I'm more than happy for people to dig into the website and to email me if they have any further questions on the low emission zone. I'm the speaker for the next session as well, so because I've probably overrun in the LEZ section, I'll just launch straight into the next section, and my colleague Kevin will also contribute towards the end of this one. So the City Council are working with partners at Aberdeenshire Council and Nest Strands on a range of transport corridor studies. And this was really initiated by our revisions to the roads hierarchy that were announced, that were adopted in June 2020 that have already been touched on. The roads hierarchy revision was really a process of just identifying, in the context of the opening of the Aberdeen Western Peripheral route, which transport corridors we considered should still be priority routes and secondary routes in the context of the AWPR. Essentially those routes that we felt that it was still appropriate for traffic to be on, now that the Aberdeen Western Peripheral route has taken some of the strategic traffic out of the city, but also a consideration of which corridors was perhaps no longer appropriate for large volumes of strategic traffic to go on. So we went through a reclassification exercise, and as I mentioned, agreed the network of priority and secondary routes, which I appreciate are not showing up very clearly on that picture, but hopefully you can see the priority routes are in purple and the secondary routes are in green. The priority routes are essentially the traditional A road network, the main corridors to and from the city centre to the Aberdeen Western Peripheral route. A main principle of the roads hierarchy review was that these priority and secondary corridors should work for all modes, not just a private car, but should work efficiently and effectively for freight, active travel and public transport as well. So the work that we're doing on the corridors at the moment are really just in-depth investigations, I suppose, as to how these corridors work, and to look at what sort of improvements we could perhaps take forward, but with a key focus on sustainable travel improvements to reflect the sustainable travel hierarchy that was reiterated in the new National Transport Strategy, as well as the net zero aspirations that we're all working towards. So the most advanced corridor that Paul has already spoken about, so I won't go into any more detail, is Wellington Road, the A956. This work actually predated the roads hierarchy, so it's at a much more advanced stage. And as Paul suggested, we'll be looking to consult on that further in spring, summer 2021 and take our final outcomes to our committee in June. The other corridor that I'm closely involved with at the moment is the approach from the west, from West Hill to Aberdeen, the A944 and the A9119, those two corridors. And the work we've done so far on these corridors have had a stronger focus, I suppose, on active travel and public transport, partly because we recognise that although freight is important along these corridors, as is general traffic, it's not, the 944 is not necessarily a key freight corridor, nor is the 9119, which potentially allows us to take forward more ambitious active travel and public transport improvements without disadvantaging that economically beneficial traffic that we still want to see move successfully along that route. So our initial appraisal work was undertaken and completed in October 2020, and we're now taking forward that to more detailed design in terms of what that hopefully quite ambitious public transport and active travel interventions will look like, looking at end-to-end provision along the corridor and where the opportunities are for that, but also where the slight difficulties will be, as we appreciate it's not going to be possible to deliver that gold standard of provision for the entire length of the route. I'll pass over to my colleague Kevin now, who's working on a couple of other corridors, just to give you a quick snapshot as to where they are.
Hi, thanks, Will. Yeah, Kevin Pert, I work with Will in the transport team. I'm leading the Wellington Garth-D multimodal study. As you can see there, it's Ellen Park and Ride. South towards Aberdeen City Centre, then out to Robert Gordon's. It's been ongoing for a while now, so we're due to start the stakeholder and public engagement shortly. So please keep an eye out for that and get in with any comments you have, with a view to a final report in May. Next slide, please. The other one is the A96. Obviously, there's been so much work there recently. We've a proposed A96 upgrade by Transport Scotland. We've got Craveston, Park and Ride, with Tekka, with Harrigan, and with Aberdeen corridor works. So a lot going on. This work has just started. We're looking at model key junctions. We have a view to improving public transport and other modes on that corridor. And that's due to complete in December. Yeah, thanks. Then
Good.
To the future there.
Kevin. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, then you go.
Yeah, so just looking at the future with 3 studies on the books to start sometime this coming year. So that's all from me, Rob. Thanks.
Apologies, Kevin. I jumped in when you still had one slide to go. I'd like to thank all the speakers. To be honest, it's been quite a lot to squeeze in, but I think it was really valuable to hear those different perspectives and get the opportunity to see things both nationally and locally. And obviously the hydrogen stuff coming in a little bit from one side as well. I think we haven't got a huge number of questions in the chat bar, so I would encourage anyone to use the hands up function to see if there are any questions for any of the speakers or any other aspects that you think we should have discussed or would like to talk about this afternoon when we've got the chance.
Sorry, I don't know how to work the hands up thing. I can see it.
Don't worry about the hands up, Colin. You can just jump in the way you've done.
Yeah,
Colin Johnson, thanks.
So I've been taking a few notes here while I've been sitting and listening. A couple of which I'd just like to mention. The width restriction that they were talking about for Golf Road. I can't see why you don't just make it a weight restriction. I feel like the width restriction makes it almost a little bit of a, oh, how wide am I? I should be okay. Whereas all the drivers know about a weight restriction. I feel it's a much better way to do it. That was one thing. The LEZ zones in Aberdeen, the whole Market Street area has always been a problem. Not so much nowadays because most people are working from home. But, one of the options was taking everyone in from the south end of the city and not from the Peterhead end. So you could be going, if you go on the green and purple routes, you could be saying people from Peterhead say need to go all the way right round the new bypass to come back into Alton. So you've got everyone funneling into the dock area from one direction instead of 2 directions, which will make it a bottleneck even worse than it already is. So that's obviously something to consider. What else to do? I mean, the biggest thing for me at the moment, it's a real bugbear of mine, is having depots in Aberdeen and I've got in central Scotland is business rates. And I know that isn't anything really to do with you guys, but I don't think any sort of transport issue is going to be a problem if the business rates aren't looked at in Aberdeen, because if you drive through any industrial estate in Aberdeen at the moment, they're all sitting either empty or they're getting torn down. Less than 5-year-old buildings getting torn down because of business rates that we have to pay in Aberdeen. So that is something that's really needs to be looked at. And having a green area, Alton's industrial estate or something, it sounds great in paper, but having to pay for that sort of facility when the business rate's already through the roof, I can't see it being viable. There is more, but I'll leave it at that just now. But thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Colin. I think there's three distinct questions there. Firstly for Ross, secondly for Will on low emission zones, and I think probably thirdly Shane would be the best person to talk to us about business rates. So can I ask Ross first to comment on the weight or width restriction?
Hi, yes, sorry. We had considered whether it would be a weight or a width restriction. However, my colleague, I understand, was in dialogue with Police Scotland about enforcement, and there was a lot of discussion about what was the easiest method of enforcement. And I think it was felt that the width restriction. We've also got a similar restriction on the beach esplanade in Aberdeen as well. So again, you've got two things. You've got similar restrictions on similar corridors, but also my understanding is that the enforcement is easier.
You have the same in Dice. You've got a weight restriction in Dice, or weight restriction. I think it is actually weight, but you know, you've still got loads of trucks coming through the centre of Dice every week. So because they're either not from the area, don't know where they're going, or are just going straight through anyway. So it's it is difficult, but I just feel that a weight restriction would be better than a width one.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. It's something that we will sort of take away and consider for future, whether we try and make them consistent throughout.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Will, there was a question about the low emission zone and whether it would be diverting more traffic around to, and potentially I think increasing south to north on Market Street. Can I add to that a question I have is whether in particularly your option 1H, the junction to the harbour would restrict traffic to or from the harbour. I'm thinking if a lorry came off the Shetland ferry, can he actually get out and go south? Because it looked to me as though that extension was onto the junction. I would have thought we would be wanting to direct traffic down Market Street away from the city centre, but I just wondered if there was if it was too long, that extension. I think Will might have frozen there. Either that or he's really thinking this one through. Kevin,
the other thing it's worth mentioning as well, and I've brought it up a few times, is that the boats all sit down with their big V8 diesel generator engines running, you know, compared to, you know, the amount of traffic. And considering the amount of traffic HGVs that actually do go through the city, the percentage is not actually that bad, really, you know, concerning buses or diesel cars. 27%, I think it was, for HGVs, which, all things being considered, is actually probably not that bad. And to be fair, we're not there just for a general kind of sightseeing, you know, we're there doing a job. So if there was a low emission zone for cars or something like that, great, but trucks that are actually going into the area to do work, I think should almost be exempt from it.
The low emission zone will involve cars, particularly restrictive on diesel cars, as well as LGVs and HGVs, and will have a factor for buses as well. So, Will, I don't know if you caught all of that.
Yeah, Will's been.
Sorry, I'm having major issues with Teams today. I've rejoined my phone, so hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you now. I'm saying I don't know if you heard the questions.
Yeah.
We thought you were pensive and just thinking them through before you answered because you froze on our screen.
Sorry, I've dropped in and out a few times today, so but hopefully I think my phone's maybe a bit more reliable than my PC, my work laptop. So I don't know what that says, but so sorry. The first issue on access to the harbour, yeah, the option 1A I think has completely unrestricted access to the harbour from the north and south. Option 4A completely restricts access to the harbour from both north and south, so there's no access to the harbour for non-compliant vehicles. My understanding of option 1H, and I would need to dig into a bit more detail, is that the access and egress from the south would still be possible. But I'll confirm that and get back to you. I think there's an issue in terms of compliant and non-compliant vehicles. There's only, I say only, but 70% of vehicles on the road just now are compliant, and I think from the top of my head, the projected compliance levels for HGVs in 2023-24, when we'll be looking to enforce the LEZ, is something like 86%. So in terms of that displaced HGV traffic, it's only potentially 14% of HGVs wouldn't be able to just drive straight through the low emission zone like they do at the moment. But just to give some comfort, all these options are, being put through the traffic models and the air quality models to look at the implications of them, the wider implications as well, where that displaced traffic goes and what impact that has. Sorry, Rab, I did catch your comment. I think, Rab, was about the. Sorry, can you repeat the comment that you had towards the end, Rab?
No, I've no idea what it was.
I had an. Oh, sorry. I don't know if it was you. Sorry, it was the issue of shipping. Yeah, the impact of shipping, I think, is slightly overestimated. The studies that have been done show that on average it's about 5% of emissions are caused by shipping, and that really is concentrated directly around the harbour area. When you go up to King Street, Union Street, Holborn Street, that's not shipping anymore. That is road traffic. So,
it is a good point, Colin, and it is one we've looked at in the past. But I think the issue on the air quality is a lot of it is really quite localised. Is that fair? Well, so yeah. The ships, a lot of their air quality issues go straight up a pipe and is dispersed in the wind, etc. So, but it has been looked at. It's a good point.
Yeah, that's Shane, my understanding as well.
Can I bring Shane in? I think you're the right person to give us some comments on business rates, Shane.
I mean, you're really risking your time now, Rab, I think, on bringing me in on that. I think, Colin, I mean, it's a massive issue. It's probably one of the biggest issues that we face here in this region. I think I've had the chance over the last couple of, particularly over January, so I made the case directly to the Cabinet Secretary for Finance at the Scottish Government. One of the examples I was given her is if you look at the last revaluation for rates, which happened in 2017, our region accounted for round about 157 million of the 350-ish million in uplift. So about 45% of the entire uplift was concentrated in Aberdeen City and Aberdeenshire. So it's a real challenge. That's sort of exacerbated, if you want, with one of the decisions that government made last year, which was to delay the revaluation. So they're going to push the rates revaluation back until 2023 now because of COVID. So that means that was due to happen next year. So that means it's going to be even longer before we get revaluation happening here in Aberdeen. So what we've been focusing on from a chamber point of view, at least over the last month or so, really linked to the Scottish budget, is whether there's any opportunity for a sort of regional rates deal and any potential sort of regional relief scheme. So there was a relief scheme that was brought in for the region off the back of the last revaluation, but that's really sort of no longer applicable to a lot of businesses. So we're looking at that. The empty property point you mentioned is quite an important one. Scottish Government, off the back of a previous review, have came down very hard on empty property, but obviously given the sort of COVID environment that we're in and how property might change, is that policy still the right policy? So there's still a lot of questions on that as well. Some positives, but not really for the haulage industry. One of the things that we were obviously really keen to get extended out was the hospitality and retail relief, and obviously that's now been extended out for a full year, which is positive. But there's a lot of work to do on rates. What we're calling obviously for a regional specific deal and some action on that, but we're also calling for, and this is a point I made to the Cabinet Secretary as well, basically a full further review in the next, basically very early in the next Parliament. So obviously we'll have the election over the next couple of months, and then when the new government comes in, a new review on rates, because we had this Barclay review which sort of tinkered around the edges, but we're about to go into what we know is going to be a really different general sort of term in terms of property use for business, retail, hospitality and other sectors that used to pay a fair bit into the system might not anymore. So there's a lot of work to do looking to the future as well. I hope that helps. I mean, you can drop me an email, call my email's up there if you want to speak a bit more about it.
Good. Okay, thanks very much, Shane. I am aware we're now starting to lose one or two people down the right hand side, and it is approaching 4 o'clock. So unless there is anything that's absolutely pressing, I think I'm going to take the opportunity there to thank not just the speakers, but everyone who's been with us today. And if there are any other points, please feel free to either put them into the chat or drop an email to us at Nestrans. So I'll close it there, but thank everybody for being involved. So have a